Imagine stealing $200 million before your 35th birthday and walking free after just 22 months in prison. Jordan Belfort made $12 million in a single 3-minute phone call. That's $4 million per minute. Jeff Bezos, at his peak, made roughly $3,715 per second during market hours. Belfort was operating at levels that make modern billionaires look slow. By age 31, he controlled a brokerage firm with over 1,000 employees generating $100 million annually in commissions alone. His personal wealth exceeded $200 million in 1990s dollars, equivalent to nearly $400 million today. But what nobody knows is the actual system he built. Everyone's seen the movie, the drugs, the parties, Leonardo DiCaprio's speeches. That's the entertainment version. The real story is darker, more calculated, and more brilliant than Hollywood showed. This wasn't some lucky kid who stumbled into money. This was a meticulously constructed machine designed to separate wealthy investors from their cash using psychological warfare, military-grade sales tactics, and a complete disregard for financial regulations. The FBI spent 5 years trying to build a case against him. The National Association of Securities Dealers launched investigations. The Securities and Exchange Commission watched his firm like hawks. And for years, Jordan Belfort operated in plain sight, throwing parties on his 167-foot yacht while federal agents collected evidence. He hired a dozen lawyers. He moved money through Swiss banks. He created shell companies in offshore accounts, and when they finally caught him, he negotiated a deal so favorable that it became legendary in financial crime circles. This is the story of how one Jewish kid from Queens transformed from a struggling meat salesman into the most infamous stockbroker in American history. How he invented sales techniques still used today. How he built a cult-like following of brokers who would do anything for him. How he manipulated the stock market while regulators watched helplessly, and how his downfall involved friendship betrayals, wiretapped confessions, and a cooperation agreement that destroyed dozens of lives. The real Wolf of Wall Street wasn't the party animal you saw on screen. He was something far more dangerous, a mathematical genius with zero conscience and an encyclopedic understanding of human greed. In 1998, Jordan Belfort stood before a federal judge facing decades in prison for securities fraud, money laundering, and stock manipulation. The man who once commanded armies of brokers, who dropped $170,000 on dinner tabs, who owned a helicopter just to avoid Long Island traffic, now wore a cheap suit and begged for leniency. He would eventually serve 22 months in federal prison, pay $110 million in restitution, of which he's paid roughly $14 million to date, and lose everything he built. But in 1987, he was just Jordan, a 25-year-old kid who'd lost his life savings when his employer, L.F. Rothschild, collapsed on Black Monday. The contrast is almost incomprehensible. Jordan Ross Belfort was born on July 9, 1962, in the Bronx, New York, to Max and Leah Belfort, two accountants who instilled a middle-class work ethic and Jewish values centered on education and financial stability. The family moved to Bayside, Queens when Jordan was young. Bayside in the 1970s was solidly middle class, tree-lined streets, small homes with tiny yards, families where both parents worked to maintain modest lifestyles. Jordan's childhood was unremarkable, except for one trait: his obsession with money, not spending it, making it. While other kids played baseball, Jordan sold Italian ice on the beach at age 13. While his friends got summer jobs as lifeguards making $3.50 an hour, Jordan found a meat supplier in Manhattan who'd sell him products at wholesale. He hired other teenagers to sell for him. He franchised his operation before he had a driver's license. By age 16, Jordan Belfort was generating $20,000 per summer, approximately $75,000 in today's money, from a network of meat and seafood sellers operating across Long Island beaches. His parents pushed college. Jordan attended American University, then transferred to the University of Maryland School of Dentistry. He dropped out after one day. According to Belfort himself, the dean opened orientation by telling students, "The golden age of dentistry is over. If you're here because you want to get rich, you're in the wrong place." Jordan walked out immediately. He had zero interest in professions with capped earning potential. What most people don't know is that Jordan spent his early 20s failing repeatedly. He tried selling Tupperware door-to-door. Failed. He attempted to start a food delivery service. Failed. He sold certificates for discount programs at local businesses. Failed. By 1984, at age 22, he was selling meat and seafood door-to-door in Long Island suburbs, driving a beat-up car, working 12-hour days, barely making rent. Behind the future wealth was a young man who understood something fundamental about human nature. People want what other people have. They make decisions emotionally and justify them rationally. They trust confidence more than competence. Jordan didn't learn this in business school. He learned it ringing doorbells in Massapequa, watching housewives decide whether to buy his lobsters. He learned that the quality of the product mattered less than the quality of the pitch, that people responded to urgency, to scarcity, to the feeling that they were getting insider access to something special. This wasn't just about sales, it was about psychological manipulation perfected through thousands of rejections and refinements. Let me take you back to 1987, the year everything changed. Jordan had finally caught a break. Through a family connection, he landed a job at L.F. Rothschild as a trainee stockbroker. Established in 1899, Rothschild was a prestigious Wall Street firm managing billions in assets. For Jordan, this was entry into the promised land. The partners wore $3,000 suits. They drove Mercedes. They summered in the Hamptons. The office hummed with money, phones ringing constantly, millions changing hands with every conversation, young brokers making more in commissions each month than Jordan's father made annually as an accountant. Jordan absorbed everything. He studied the senior brokers. He noticed that the successful ones weren't necessarily smarter, they were bolder. They spoke with absolute certainty. They never said, "I think" or "maybe." They made declarative statements. They painted pictures of wealth. They made clients feel like insiders getting access to opportunities reserved for the elite. But Jordan's Wall Street education lasted exactly 4 months. On October 19, 1987, Black Monday, the Dow Jones Industrial Average plummeted 22.6% in a single day, the largest one-day percentage decline in stock market history. L.F. Rothschild, heavily leveraged and overexposed, began hemorrhaging money. Within weeks, the firm laid off hundreds of employees. Jordan, among the newest and least essential, lost his job immediately. He was 25 years old, back to selling meat, back to struggling. Except now he'd tasted the Wall Street life. He'd seen how much money could be made, and he'd learned the basic mechanics of stock trading, cold calling, and securities sales. What happened next would transform him from a failed meat salesman into one of the most notorious financial criminals in modern American history. But to understand how a kid from Queens could steal $200 million and build an empire of fraud, we need to go back to where the real story begins, a small office in a Long Island strip mall, where Jordan Belfort discovered a legal loophole that would make him richer than he'd ever imagined. Chapter 1. Humble Origins. The strip mall at 3959 Veterans Memorial Highway in Bohemia, Long Island, looked like every other suburban commercial wasteland in 1988. Sandwiched between a Chinese takeout restaurant and a discount mattress store, sat a small office with no sign on the door. Inside, Jordan Belfort sat at a folding table with a rotary phone, a list of names, and a plan that would change everything. This is where it started. Not on Wall Street, not in Manhattan boardrooms. In a 400-square-foot office that smelled like General Tso's chicken and cost $400 per month to rent. After L.F. Rothschild collapsed, Jordan spent months back in the meat business. But his mind never left Wall Street. He'd experienced the rush of commission-based sales where a single phone call could generate thousands of dollars. Meat and seafood suddenly felt like prison. He needed back into stocks, but no legitimate firm would hire him. He had 4 months of experience and a resume that screamed amateur. So Jordan started asking questions. He called former colleagues from Rothschild. He researched securities regulations. He studied the OTC market, over-the-counter stocks that traded outside major exchanges like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. And he discovered something extraordinary: penny stocks. Penny stocks are securities trading below $5 per share, typically for small companies with minimal track records. They're excluded from major exchanges due to low market capitalization or failure to meet listing requirements. In 1988, penny stocks were the Wild West of American finance. Minimal SEC oversight, no institutional investors watching, no financial journalists covering them, just small companies desperate for capital and retail investors hunting for the next big thing. But here's what made penny stocks beautiful from Jordan's perspective. The commissions. On blue-chip stocks like IBM or General Electric, brokers earned maybe 1 to 2% commission. On penny stocks, brokers could charge 50% commission. You see, investors didn't understand the fee structures. When a broker said, "I've got 1,000 shares of this medical technology company at $0.50 per share," the client heard, "I'm spending $500. They didn't realize that of that $500, the broker might keep $250 in commission, with only $250 actually purchasing stock. Jordan understood this immediately. If he could sell penny stocks, he could make 25 times more commission than selling legitimate securities. The only problem? Penny stocks were, almost universally, garbage. Companies with no revenue, no products, no realistic path to profitability. Just optimistic business plans and desperate CEOs willing to issue stock to raise capital. Jordan needed to learn the business from someone already doing it. Through a connection, he met a broker named Dwayne, who ran a small operation trading penny stocks out of a basement office in Long Island. Dwayne agreed to teach Jordan in exchange for help expanding the business. What Jordan learned shocked him. Dwayne's operation was simple but effective. Step 1. Find a small company willing to issue shares. Step 2. Take those shares at wholesale prices, typically a few cents per share. Step 3. Create marketing materials that made the company sound revolutionary. Step 4. Cold call investors and sell shares at massive markups. Step 5. Pocket the difference. It wasn't quite legal. It wasn't quite illegal. It existed in a regulatory gray zone that the SEC hadn't yet caught up to. I mean, think about it. In 1988, the Securities and Exchange Commission was primarily focused on major exchanges and large institutional fraud. They had neither the manpower nor the interest in monitoring thousands of tiny penny stock operations scattered across America. As long as you didn't engage in obvious pump-and-dump schemes or explicitly lie about company prospects, you could operate with relative impunity. Jordan worked with Dwayne for 3 months, learning the mechanics, studying the sales pitches, understanding the legal boundaries. Then, in June 1988, he decided to go independent. He rented the strip mall office in Bohemia. He bought a phone. He created business cards that read Investor Center, a name deliberately chosen to sound legitimate without being affiliated with any actual registered firm. The first few weeks were brutal. Jordan called hundreds of potential investors daily. He pitched penny stocks for obscure companies, medical device manufacturers that existed only on paper, technology firms with no products, mineral exploration companies that had never found minerals. His success rate was perhaps 1%. For every 100 calls, he might make one sale. But that one sale generated $500 in commission from a $1,000 investment. If he could make 4 sales per day, that was $2,000 daily. Do that 5 days a week, and suddenly he was generating $40,000 monthly, more than most Americans made in a year. Jordan refined his pitch through obsessive repetition. He recorded himself. He analyzed which phrases generated interest and which created objections. He studied the psychological triggers that moved people from curiosity to commitment. And he noticed something crucial. The specific stock didn't matter nearly as much as the story around it. You see, investors didn't buy stocks. They bought narratives. They bought the dream of turning $5,000 into $50,000. They bought the idea of being smart enough to get in early on the next Microsoft. Jordan's job wasn't to sell shares of some unknown company. It was to sell hope, greed, and ego. By August 1988, just 2 months after opening his solo operation, Jordan was generating $50,000 monthly in personal income. He hired his first employee, his childhood friend Elliot Lowenstern, who'd been selling carpets and hated it. Jordan taught Elliot his refined pitch. Within weeks, Elliot was also making sales. Then Jordan hired another friend, then another. By October 1988, he had 5 people working in that tiny strip mall office, all cold calling from morning until night, all selling penny stocks, all generating massive commissions. The operation was basic. Jordan would find penny stocks, often through newsletters or by contacting small company CEOs directly. He'd negotiate to buy shares at wholesale. Then he'd create a pitch for his brokers. The pitch was always the same structure: establish credibility, introduce scarcity, paint the vision, create urgency, close the sale. Here's the thing. Jordan discovered he had an almost supernatural ability to motivate salespeople. He wasn't just good at selling to clients, he was extraordinary at selling his vision to employees. He'd stand in that cramped office, barely room to move between desks, and give speeches about wealth, about freedom, about building something bigger than themselves. He made $40,000 annual salary guys feel like they were soldiers in an army conquering Wall Street. By December 1988, 6 months after starting Investor Center, Jordan was generating $100,000 monthly in personal income. His team of 5 brokers was collectively producing $300,000 monthly in commissions. Jordan took a 50% cut of everything his employees generated, plus 100% of his own sales. He was 26 years old. He'd gone from selling meat to making over $1 million annually, and he'd only just started. But this wasn't sustainable. The office was too small. The name Investor Center was too generic, and Jordan was starting to think bigger. He didn't want to run a small boiler room operation forever. He wanted to build something massive, something legitimate, something that could rival the Wall Street firms that had rejected him. What Jordan needed was a name that sounded prestigious. He needed a location that screamed success, and he needed a strategy that would attract not just any brokers, but the most aggressive, hungry, commission-driven salespeople in America. In early 1989, Jordan started planning his next move. He found a business name that had been abandoned by a small, legitimate brokerage firm that went bankrupt. The name sounded sophisticated, old money, trustworthy, perfect for a company that was none of those things. The name was Stratton Oakmont, and it would become synonymous with Wall Street excess, fraud, and the most aggressive stock sales operation in American history. Chapter 2. First Blood March 1989. Jordan Belfort, age 26, signed the lease on a proper office space in Lake Success, New York. The building was legitimate: corporate offices, law firms, accounting practices. Stratton Oakmont would operate out of Suite 201, a 2,000 square foot space that could accommodate 20 brokers comfortably. The name Stratton Oakmont came from a defunct brokerage that had dissolved years earlier. Jordan purchased the rights to the name for less than $2,000. Why did the name matter? Because in securities, perception is everything. Investor Center sounded like a Long Island strip mall operation. Stratton Oakmont sounded like it had been managing money since the Gilded Age. It sounded British, old money, trustworthy. Jordan kept his 5 original brokers from the Bohemia office and began recruiting aggressively. But he wasn't looking for traditional Wall Street types. He specifically avoided hiring anyone with legitimate brokerage experience. You see, trained brokers brought baggage, ethical concerns, regulatory knowledge, and realistic expectations about commission structures. Jordan wanted blank slates, young, hungry, preferably from working-class backgrounds. Guys who grew up with nothing and would do anything to escape that life. His first major recruit was Danny Porish. Born in 1957, Danny was 5 years older than Jordan and had been bouncing between low-level sales jobs his entire adult life. He'd sold cars, insurance, medical equipment, always hustling, never quite breaking through. Danny had 0 securities experience, no college degree, and a personality that made pit bulls look gentle. He was also Jordan's wife's cousin, which created a family connection that would prove both valuable and complicated. Jordan made Danny his second-in-command immediately. Not because Danny was particularly smart, but because Danny was loyal and ruthless. When brokers got cold feet about aggressive sales tactics, Danny would verbally destroy them. When clients called demanding refunds, Danny would gaslight them into believing their losses were their own fault. Danny became the enforcer that every operation needs, the person willing to do what the leader can't be seen doing. Together, Jordan and Danny refined what would become known as the Stratton Oakmont system. This wasn't just a sales pitch. This was a comprehensive methodology that combined psychology, linguistics, and manipulation into the most effective stock-selling technique ever created. The system started with lead generation. Stratton Oakmont purchased lists of potential investors, people who'd previously purchased stocks, often through other penny stock operations. These lists contained names, phone numbers, investment amounts, and notes about the investors' interests. A list of 10,000 names might cost $500. Each name represented a potential commission of thousands of dollars. Brokers were divided into two categories: openers and closers. Openers made the first call. Their job wasn't to sell stock immediately, it was to qualify the prospect and establish a relationship. The opener would call and introduce himself as a senior partner at Stratton Oakmont, a boutique investment firm specializing in emerging growth companies. He'd ask questions. What's your current portfolio? What returns are you seeing? Are you interested in more aggressive growth opportunities? If the prospect showed interest and had investable assets of at least $10,000, the opener would promise to send information about an exclusive opportunity and call back in a week. Then the opener would pass the lead to a closer. Closers were the elite. These were the brokers who could turn interest into commitment, hesitation into urgency. Jordan developed a script that closers would memorize word for word, not the general idea, the exact words, pauses, and inflections. He called it the Kodak pitch, because he initially used Kodak stock as an example before switching to penny stocks. Here's how the closer's call worked. The broker would call back exactly 1 week later. He'd reference the previous conversation, establishing continuity. Then he'd launch into the pitch. John, I'm calling because I promised I'd bring you an opportunity, and I never break my word. I want to tell you about a company that reminds me of where some of the great companies were before they became household names. I'm talking about a ground floor opportunity in a sector that's about to explode. Notice the language, not I found a stock, not would you be interested in. Declarative statements, certainty. The broker positioned himself as doing the client a favor by providing access. Then came the company introduction. Jordan taught his brokers to describe penny stock companies as if they were legitimate enterprises. A medical device company with no FDA approvals became a revolutionary firm on the verge of disrupting the healthcare industry. A technology company with no products became a Silicon Valley innovator positioned to capture market share in the fastest-growing sector in America. The brokers would cite impressive-sounding but meaningless statistics. This company has seen 300% growth in research and development spending. Translation: they went from spending $100,000 to $300,000, and research and development meant 3 guys in a garage. But it sounded impressive. Look, the genius of Jordan's system was the urgency creation. Every pitch included artificial scarcity. John, I can only allocate 1,000 shares to you. We're limiting access to maintain price stability as we bring larger institutional investors into the deal. Complete fiction. There were no institutional investors. There was no allocation limit. But the client felt special, like they were getting insider access. Then came the close. Jordan taught his brokers to assume the sale. Never ask, would you like to purchase? Instead, John, I'm putting you down for 1,000 shares at $0.75 per share. That's a $750 investment positioned to return multiples as this company executes its business plan. I'll send the confirmation today. You'll receive certificates in 2 weeks. If the client hesitated, the broker would deploy objection handlers. Jordan had created responses for every possible concern. It sounds risky. John, all investments carry risk. The question is, do you want safe, boring returns or do you want wealth-building opportunities? I need to think about it. John, I respect that, but I need to be honest. I have 15 other clients waiting for access. If you pass, I can't guarantee availability tomorrow. I want to research the company. Absolutely, and I encourage that. But understand, by the time this information becomes public, the price will have moved. We're at 0.75 now. Once this hits broader awareness, we're looking at $3, $5, potentially higher. If the client still resisted, Jordan had a final technique, the takeaway. John, I hear what you're saying. Maybe this isn't right for you. Let me call you when something more suitable comes along. Then silence. Just wait. The client, feeling like they'd just been rejected from an exclusive club, would often reverse course. Wait, no, let me do the 1,000 shares. What's interesting is that Jordan wasn't particularly concerned whether the stocks went up or down. The commission was made immediately when the client purchased. If the stock price rose, great. The client would be happy and open to buying more. If it fell, Jordan would simply call back with a new pitch. John, the market overreacted. This is actually a buying opportunity. Let me add another 1,000 shares to your position at a discount. By summer 1989, Stratton Oakmont had 20 brokers making hundreds of calls daily. The office energy was manic. Phones ringing constantly. Brokers shouting into receivers. A massive bell mounted on the wall that Jordan would ring every time someone closed a deal over $10,000. The sound of that bell became Pavlovian. Brokers would work harder just to hear it, to have Jordan recognize their sale in front of everyone. Jordan instituted morning meetings that were part pep rally, part psychological warfare. He'd stand before his brokers and deliver speeches about wealth, success, and proving the world wrong. Why you think Wall Street respects us? They think we're nobodies from Long Island. They think we're not smart enough, not connected enough, not good enough. Every sale you make is proof they're wrong. Every commission is you taking what they said you couldn't have. The truth is, Jordan understood something profound about human motivation. His brokers weren't driven primarily by money. They were driven by validation. Many came from working-class families where they'd been told their whole lives that Wall Street was for other people. For Ivy League graduates. For kids whose parents summered in Connecticut. Jordan showed them that aggression and hunger could beat pedigree and connections. By August 1989, Stratton Oakmont was generating $500,000 monthly in total commissions. Jordan's personal income exceeded $100,000 per month. He bought a house in Old Brookville, one of the wealthiest communities on Long Island. He purchased a Mercedes. He started wearing custom suits. At 27 years old, Jordan Belfort was living the Wall Street life that had been denied to him just 2 years earlier. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Jordan knew it was unsustainable. The penny stocks he sold were, almost without exception, worthless. Companies with no revenue streams, no realistic business models, no path to profitability. The stocks would occasionally spike in price due to Stratton's aggressive sales tactics, creating brief moments of profit for early investors. But inevitably, the prices would crash, leaving most clients with losses. Jordan didn't care. The commission was made at the point of sale. Whether the client made or lost money was irrelevant to Stratton's bottom line. And when clients called angry about their losses, Danny Porish would handle them, either convincing them to double down or simply ignoring their complaints until they gave up. By late 1989, Jordan started noticing regulatory attention. The National Association of Securities Dealers, NASD, the self-regulatory organization overseeing broker-dealers, began receiving complaints about Stratton Oakmont. Investors reported high-pressure sales tactics, misrepresentations about stock prospects, and refusal to process sell orders when they wanted to liquidate positions. Jordan hired lawyers, good ones. He instructed his brokers to never put anything incriminating in writing. All pitches were verbal, all promises were implied, never explicit. If a broker said, "This stock will triple," that was an opinion, not a guarantee. Jordan understood that securities fraud required proving intent, that he knowingly deceived investors. As long as he maintained plausible deniability, prosecution would be difficult. In December 1989, Stratton Oakmont received its first formal inquiry from the NASD. Jordan cooperated superficially, providing requested documents, answering questions with carefully worded responses prepared by attorneys. The inquiry went nowhere. Insufficient evidence of wrongdoing. Jordan had dodged the first bullet, and he'd learned a valuable lesson. Regulators were understaffed, overwhelmed, and could be managed with the right legal strategy. This wasn't a deterrent. It was confirmation that he could grow bigger without meaningful consequences. As 1990 approached, Jordan Belfort stood at a crossroads. He could maintain Stratton Oakmont as a profitable but modest operation, stay under the regulatory radar, and make a comfortable living. Or he could scale up, recruit hundreds of brokers, and build something truly massive, knowing that increased size would inevitably bring increased scrutiny. Jordan chose growth, and that decision would transform Stratton Oakmont from a successful boiler room into a legendary fraud machine that would dominate Wall Street headlines for the next decade. Chapter 3. Boiler Room. The transformation of Stratton Oakmont from a 20-person operation to a full-scale boiler room empire began with a single realization. Jordan Belfort needed more brokers, and traditional recruiting wouldn't work. By early 1990, Stratton Oakmont was operating out of a significantly larger space in Lake Success. The office now had room for 50 brokers, though Jordan only had about 25 employees. The problem was finding the right people. Traditional job postings attracted candidates with expectations of professional environments, reasonable hours, and ethical business practices. That wasn't Stratton Oakmont. Jordan needed people who were desperate, hungry, willing to operate in gray areas for the chance at serious money. So he stopped posting ads in newspapers and started recruiting in bars, gyms, and strip clubs across Long Island. The pitch was always the same. You hate your job. You're making $30,000 a year with no upside. I can teach you to make that in a month. It's commission only, but if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked, I'll make you rich. The response was overwhelming. Jordan would get 20, 30, sometimes 50 responses to a single recruitment conversation. He'd invite candidates to the Stratton office for group interviews. These weren't traditional interviews. They were auditions. Jordan would have candidates stand in front of the group and sell him a pen. Not explain the features of the pen. Sell it, create urgency, close the deal. Most failed spectacularly. They'd talk about the pen's quality, its smooth writing, its durability. Jordan would cut them off. I don't care about the pen. Make me need it. Make me feel like I'm stupid for not already owning it. The candidates who succeeded understood that sales wasn't about the product. It was about controlling the conversation, identifying the prospect's emotional triggers, and creating manufactured urgency. These were the people Jordan hired. Here's what happened next. Jordan created a training program that would become legendary in boiler room culture. New hires, called Strattonites, went through a 2-week intensive training before they ever called a client. The training was part education, part indoctrination. Week 1 focused on the mechanics. Trainees memorized the Stratton pitch word for word. They practiced objection handlers until responses became automatic. They learned the technical language of securities, market capitalization, PE ratios, IPO processes. Not because they needed deep understanding, but because dropping these terms made them sound credible to unsophisticated investors. Jordan recorded master calls, actual sales calls from top brokers closing big deals. Trainees would listen repeatedly, studying the pacing, the tone shifts, the psychological manipulation. They learned that the words mattered less than the delivery. Confidence sold, certainty sold, hesitation killed deals. Week 2 was psychological conditioning. Jordan would bring in his top earners to speak. These guys, many of whom had been selling used cars or working construction 2 years earlier, would stand before trainees, showing off Rolex watches, Mercedes keys, photos of new homes. I made $75,000 last month, they'd announce. Before Stratton, I was making $400 weekly installing cable. Jordan changed my life. But here's the thing. Jordan wasn't just training brokers. He was building a cult. Morning meetings became mandatory attendance events where Jordan would deliver increasingly elaborate motivational speeches. He'd pace the floor like a general addressing troops before battle. You think those guys on Wall Street are better than you? They're not. They had rich parents who paid for Wharton MBAs. You have hunger, you have drive, and that beats pedigree every single time. The office culture was deliberately designed to be tribal. Jordan created competitions where the top producer each month would win cash bonuses, expensive dinners, sometimes trips. He'd publicly shame underperformers, calling them out by name during meetings. Steve closed 1 deal this week. 1. Steve, are you here to make money or waste my time? This public humiliation technique was brutally effective. Nobody wanted to be the example of failure. Brokers would work 12, 14, 16-hour days to avoid Jordan's public critique. The office became a pressure cooker, where making money wasn't just about personal wealth, it was about status within the Stratton hierarchy. Look, Jordan also understood that his brokers needed to believe in what they were selling. Complete cynicism would come across in calls, so he created elaborate justifications for the penny stocks they pushed. He'd bring in CEOs of the companies Stratton promoted. These CEOs would give presentations about their revolutionary products and game-changing business models. The brokers, wanting to believe, would convince themselves that maybe these companies actually had potential. Of course, Jordan knew better. He was often working directly with these CEOs in arrangements where Stratton would artificially inflate stock prices through aggressive sales, allowing insiders to sell their shares at peaks. This is called a pump-and-dump scheme, and it's explicitly illegal. But proving it required evidence of coordination, which Jordan was careful to obscure. By mid-1990, Stratton Oakmont had grown to 50 brokers. The office was chaos. Phones ringing constantly, brokers screaming into receivers, not angry but enthusiastic, trying to project energy through phone lines. Jordan had installed multiple bells throughout the office. Landing a $5,000 deal earned 1 ring. A $10,000 deal got 3 rings. A $25,000 deal got 10 rings, plus Jordan himself would walk over to congratulate the broker in front of everyone. The bell system created a feedback loop. Brokers became addicted to the recognition. The money was great, but the public acknowledgement of success became even more intoxicating. Junior brokers would watch senior producers ring bells repeatedly throughout the day and work harder to achieve the same recognition. Jordan also instituted a controversial compensation structure. New brokers started at pure commission. They earned nothing unless they closed deals. If a trainee went 3 weeks without a sale, they were fired immediately. No warnings, no second chances. This created a sink-or-swim environment where only the most aggressive survived, but brokers who succeeded entered a different tier. Once you proved yourself by generating $50,000 in monthly commissions, you gained access to better lead lists. Stratton's lead acquisition system was sophisticated. They purchased data from multiple sources. Magazine subscriptions, Forbes fortune readers were assumed to have investment capital, charity donations. People who donated 1,000 talent plus were categorized as high net worth, and especially previous penny stock purchases from other firms. Top-tier brokers got golden lists, leads who had previously invested $25,000 or more in penny stocks. These prospects were pre-qualified and much easier to close. A good broker with a golden list could generate $150,000 in monthly commissions, of which they'd keep 40–50%. That translated to personal income exceeding $60,000 monthly, or over $700,000 annually. You see, Jordan created a meritocracy based solely on sales performance. Education didn't matter. Experience didn't matter. The only metric was commissions generated. This attracted a specific personality type, ultra-competitive, morally flexible, and motivated primarily by money and status. By late 1990, Stratton's monthly commission generation exceeded $2 million. Jordan was personally taking home over $500,000 monthly. At age 28, his net worth exceeded $10 million. He bought a mansion in Old Brookville with a pool, tennis court, and 6-car garage. He purchased a Porsche 928 to go alongside his Mercedes. He started wearing $5,000 custom suits and $20,000 watches. But the wealth created problems. Jordan's lifestyle attracted attention. Neighbors in Old Brookville noticed the young guy throwing parties with dozens of people, luxury cars constantly coming and going. Local newspapers started mentioning young Wall Street executives living in the area. Jordan loved the attention, but his lawyers warned him, visibility brings scrutiny. There were other issues. Some of Stratton's brokers were struggling with the moral weight of what they were doing. They'd call elderly retirees and convince them to invest life savings into worthless stocks. They'd pressure middle-class families to liquidate safe investments and buy high-risk penny stocks. When those stocks inevitably collapsed, the brokers would hear the desperation in follow-up calls. "You said this was safe. I've lost everything. I need my money back." Jordan handled these crises with a combination of psychological manipulation and ruthless pragmatism. He'd gather brokers who were having ethical concerns and give speeches about capitalism, personal responsibility, and caveat emptor. Nobody forced these people to invest. They're adults making adult decisions. If they lose money, that's the risk they accepted. You think Merrill Lynch brokers cry when clients lose money? This is business. For brokers who couldn't overcome their guilt, Jordan showed no mercy. He'd fire them immediately and replace them within days. There was never a shortage of candidates willing to take their place. The truth is, Jordan built Stratton Oakmont on a simple principle: maximize short-term profits, regardless of long-term consequences. The business model was fundamentally unsustainable. Eventually, enough investors would lose enough money that regulators would be forced to intervene. But Jordan calculated that he could make tens of millions before that happened. And even if Stratton got shut down, he'd have enough wealth to start over or simply retire. By December 1990, Stratton Oakmont had grown to 80 brokers operating out of a 10,000 square foot office. Monthly commissions exceeded $3 million. Jordan's personal income topped $750,000 monthly. He was 28 years old and controlled one of the most profitable brokerage operations in America. But size brought new challenges. The NASD was receiving dozens of complaints monthly about Stratton's practices. The SEC had opened a preliminary inquiry, and several clients who'd lost significant money were consulting attorneys about potential fraud cases. Jordan responded by hiring more lawyers and becoming more sophisticated in his operations. He created complex corporate structures to obscure money flows. He began using offshore accounts to move profits beyond US regulatory reach, and he started developing relationships with Swiss banks that specialized in private banking for high net worth individuals seeking discretion. What Jordan didn't know, couldn't have known in late 1990, was that the FBI had begun taking an interest in Stratton Oakmont. Not a formal investigation yet, just an agent in the New York field office reading complaint reports and noticing patterns. That agent would eventually become Jordan's nemesis, the person who would dedicate years to building a case that would destroy everything Jordan had built. But that was still years away. For now, Jordan Belfort was riding high, convinced of his own invincibility, building an empire that would soon require a name that matched its ambitions. Stratton Oakmont was about to become not just a successful boiler room, but a legitimate-seeming brokerage firm with ambitions of respectability. The question was, could Jordan scale up without losing control? Could he maintain the aggressive sales culture while appearing legitimate to regulators? And could he keep making millions while the walls slowly closed in around him? Chapter 4. Stratton Oakmont. January 1991 marked the beginning of Stratton Oakmont's transformation from a profitable boiler room into a seemingly legitimate brokerage firm with national ambitions. Jordan Belfort, now 28 years old and worth approximately $15 million, made a strategic decision. He would pursue actual broker-dealer registration with the NASD and operate Stratton Oakmont as a legitimate firm, at least on paper. The plan was brilliant in its audacity. If Stratton could achieve full NASD registration, they'd gain credibility that would make sales easier and regulatory scrutiny more difficult. Regulators tend to focus on obviously sketchy operations. A registered broker-dealer with proper licenses and documentation flies under the radar more easily. But there was a problem: Jordan Belfort himself. His aggressive tactics and the growing complaint file made him a liability in any registration application. NASD would never approve a broker-dealer application with Jordan as the principal owner. So Jordan did something clever. He disappeared from the official corporate structure. On paper, Danny Porish became the president of Stratton Oakmont. Jordan remained involved as a consultant and major shareholder, but his name didn't appear on registration documents. This allowed Stratton to submit applications without Jordan's baggage. The NASD approval process took months. Stratton had to provide detailed financial records, demonstrate capital adequacy, submit background checks on all principals, and show compliance systems to prevent fraud. Jordan hired consultants who specialized in navigating NASD registration. They helped create the appearance of robust compliance systems, written procedures, recorded phone lines, supervisory structures. In reality, these compliance systems were theatre. The procedures existed in binders that nobody read. The recorded phone lines captured pitches that violated securities regulations daily. The supervisory structure consisted of Danny Porish, who encouraged rather than prevented aggressive tactics. But the documentation looked impressive. And in June 1991, Stratton Oakmont received conditional NASD approval as a registered broker-dealer. This was a game changer. Stratton could now advertise as a NASD member firm. They could use official-looking letterhead. They could tell clients they were fully regulated and monitored by federal authorities. Jordan immediately leveraged this credibility. He moved Stratton to an even larger office space, a massive floor in a modern building in Lake Success that could accommodate 200 brokers. The new office was designed to impress. Marble floors, glass conference rooms, a massive trading floor with rows of desks, computer terminals, and dozens of phone lines. To a visitor, Stratton Oakmont looked like a legitimate, successful brokerage firm. The legitimate appearance allowed Jordan to recruit a different caliber of broker. Previously, Stratton attracted primarily working-class kids with no alternatives. Now, Jordan could recruit college graduates, people with some securities experience, brokers from other firms looking for better commission structures. The talent level increased significantly. But here's what's interesting. Jordan didn't abandon the boiler room tactics. He simply refined them. The new brokers learned the same aggressive pitches, the same objection handlers, the same psychological manipulation techniques. The difference was that they did it from a registered firm with NASD credentials, which made everything seem more legitimate. Jordan also began diversifying Stratton's operations. In addition to penny stocks, Stratton started handling IPOs, initial public offerings, for small companies going public. This was potentially lucrative and somewhat less legally problematic than pure penny stock manipulation. When a company goes public, they hire an underwriter to sell shares to investors. Stratton Oakmont would serve as underwriter for small companies, taking a percentage of capital raised. The problem was that Stratton's IPO business operated similarly to their penny stock operation. Jordan would take companies public at inflated valuations, use Stratton's army of brokers to create artificial demand, drive prices up in initial trading, then allow insiders to sell at peaks. Retail investors who bought during the hype would watch values collapse as the artificial demand disappeared. This is where Jordan's operation crossed from unethical into explicitly criminal. Securities law allows for aggressive marketing and optimistic projections. What it doesn't allow is coordinated manipulation, artificially inflating prices through false demand to benefit insiders. Jordan was doing exactly that, but proving it required evidence of coordination that he carefully concealed. Look, by late 1991, Stratton Oakmont employed 120 brokers and was generating over $5 million in monthly commissions. The office culture had evolved into something almost impossible to describe to someone who wasn't there. Imagine a trading floor combined with a fraternity house, combined with a sales cult. Jordan held morning meetings at 8:30 a.m. daily. Attendance was mandatory. He'd stand at the front of the trading floor with a microphone, and for 30 minutes he'd deliver speeches that were part motivation, part financial education, part psychological manipulation. He'd talk about the stocks they were pushing that week, the pitches that were working, the objections clients were raising and how to handle them. Then he'd move into pure motivation. You know what the difference is between you and those guys at Goldman Sachs? Nothing. They're not smarter. They're not harder working. They just had different opportunities. We're creating our own opportunities. Every time you close a deal, you're proving that hunger beats pedigree. The brokers would go crazy. Applause, shouting, banging on desks. Jordan had created an environment where making money wasn't just about personal wealth. It was about being part of something bigger, proving something to the world. Then the work would begin. From 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., the trading floor was pure chaos. Over 100 brokers on phones simultaneously, all using variations of the same aggressive pitch. The noise level was extraordinary. Brokers would literally shout into phones to be heard over the surrounding chaos. "John, I'm telling you, this stock is moving today. I can get you 5,000 shares at 120, but I need your commitment right now. The bell system had evolved. Stratton now had a massive bell in the center of the trading floor. $10,000 deals got 3 rings. $25,000 deals got 10 rings. $50,000 deals got 20 rings, and Jordan himself would stand up and applaud. $100,000 deals were rare but legendary. Jordan would stop all trading, ring the bell continuously for a minute, and have the broker stand on their desk while everyone applauded. This public recognition created intense competition. Brokers would work 14-hour days, not just for commissions, but for the status of being top producer. Jordan published weekly rankings showing each broker's commission generation. The top 10 brokers got better leads, better desks, recognition in meetings. The bottom 10 got publicly shamed and were at risk of being fired. You see, Jordan understood that human beings are motivated less by absolute achievement than by relative status. A broker making $50,000 monthly would still feel like a failure if others were making $100,000. The competitive environment pushed everyone to work harder, make more calls, close more deals. But the intensity came with costs. Brokers burned out at extraordinary rates. The average tenure at Stratton Oakmont was 18 months. People would make massive money for a year or two, then either quit from exhaustion or get fired for failing to maintain performance. Jordan didn't care. There were always more hungry kids willing to take their place. The culture also became increasingly problematic in other ways. Success at Stratton was measured purely by commission generation, which created a moral vacuum. Brokers who expressed concern about selling worthless stocks to retirees were mocked as weak. Empathy became a liability. The only value was closing deals and making money. Jordan reinforced this culture deliberately. He'd tell stories in morning meetings about brokers who'd gotten soft and failed. Mike felt bad about calling that widow back after her stock dropped. Know what Mike's doing now? Selling insurance for $40,000 a year. Meanwhile, Rick closed her on another $20,000 investment, made $10,000 in commission, and bought a BMW. Who made the right choice? The message was clear. Sympathy was for losers. Winners closed deals regardless of consequences. By early 1992, Stratton Oakmont was generating $7 million in monthly commissions. Jordan's personal income exceeded $1.5 million monthly. His net worth approached $30 million. He bought a yacht, not a small boat, a 50-foot cigarette boat that cost $750,000. He joined country clubs. He dated models. At 29 years old, Jordan Belfort was living a lifestyle that most people couldn't imagine, but the growth attracted attention. The NASD, which had granted Stratton registration just months earlier, began receiving alarming numbers of complaints. Investors reported high-pressure sales tactics, misrepresentations about stock prospects, and difficulties selling positions. The NASD opened an investigation into Stratton's practices. Jordan responded with his standard playbook: hire expensive lawyers, cooperate superficially, provide documentation that looked legitimate while obscuring actual practices. The NASD investigation dragged on for months without reaching conclusions. Regulators were overwhelmed and understaffed. Stratton could afford teams of lawyers who specialized in creating reasonable doubt and procedural delays. What's interesting is that Jordan seemed to believe he was invincible. He'd beaten early regulatory inquiries. He'd grown Stratton from nothing to a multi-million-dollar operation in just 3 years. He was surrounded by employees who treated him like a god, lawyers who told him he was protected, and accountants who moved his money into increasingly complex offshore structures. The truth is, Jordan's success made him arrogant. He started taking bigger risks. He began using Stratton to manipulate not just penny stocks, but mid-sized securities with real market capitalizations. He coordinated with other brokers at different firms to create artificial trading volume. He developed relationships with organized crime figures who controlled stock certificates and could help with manipulation schemes. These activities pushed far beyond gray areas into explicit securities fraud. But Jordan calculated that the profits were worth the risks, and in the short term, he was right. By mid-1992, Stratton Oakmont was one of the most profitable brokerage firms per broker in America. They weren't the biggest, That was Merrill Lynch, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley. But on a per-broker basis, Stratton was generating extraordinary commissions. Jordan also started cultivating a public image. He gave interviews to local newspapers, positioning himself as a young entrepreneur who'd succeeded through hustle and determination. He made donations to charities, gaining positive press coverage. He wanted to be seen as a legitimate businessman, not a boiler room operator. But behind the public relations campaign, Stratton remained fundamentally a fraud machine. The stocks they pushed were overwhelmingly worthless. The IPOs they underwrote were designed to enrich insiders, not create shareholder value. The brokers' pitches contained materially false statements about company prospects and stock performance potential. By late 1992, estimates suggest that Stratton Oakmont had sold over $1 billion in securities, generating approximately $200 million in commissions, of which Jordan personally kept roughly $50 million. He was 30 years old. He'd transformed from a failed meat salesman to one of the richest young men in America. But the foundation was cracking. The NASD investigation was intensifying. The SEC had opened its own parallel inquiry, and several defrauded investors had filed lawsuits that were beginning to uncover the coordination between Stratton and the companies whose stocks they manipulated. Jordan's response was to grow faster. He expanded Stratton to 150 brokers. He opened a satellite office in Long Island to handle overflow. He began recruiting brokers from competitors, offering higher commission splits to attract top talent. His logic was simple. If he grew fast enough and made enough money, he could outlast regulatory attention and eventually transition Stratton into a more legitimate operation. It was a gamble, and for a while it seemed to be working. Stratton continued growing, profits continued rising, and Jordan continued living a lifestyle of almost unimaginable excess. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't see, was that federal law enforcement was beginning to take Stratton Oakmont seriously. Not just as a regulatory problem, but as a criminal enterprise worthy of FBI investigation. The machine Jordan built was about to reach its peak, and the higher it rose, the harder it would eventually fall. Chapter 5. Money Machine. By 1993, Stratton Oakmont had evolved beyond a simple boiler room operation into a sophisticated criminal enterprise generating wealth at a scale that attracted national attention. Jordan Belfort, now 30 years old, controlled an organization that was printing money faster than almost any legitimate business in America. The numbers were staggering. Stratton employed over 1,000 brokers across multiple offices. Monthly commission generation exceeded $10 million, translating to over $120 million annually. Jordan's personal take was approximately 25–30% of firm profits, generating personal income exceeding $3 million monthly, or roughly $40 million annually. To put this in perspective, Jordan Belfort was making more money than most Fortune 500 CEOs, and he was only 30 years old running a firm that officially didn't exist until 5 years earlier. The money machine operated on several revenue streams, each more lucrative and legally problematic than the last. Stream 1 was the original penny stock operation. Stratton's brokers would identify micro-cap companies with virtually no legitimate business operations. Jordan would negotiate to purchase shares at wholesale, typically a few cents per share. Stratton brokers would then sell these shares to retail investors at massive markups, sometimes 50–100% above what Stratton paid. The commission was built into the spread between wholesale purchase price and retail sale price. Here's how it worked practically. Stratton might buy 10 million shares of some medical device company at $0.05 per share, investing $500,000. Brokers would then sell those shares to clients at $0.50 per share. If Stratton sold all 10 million shares, they'd generate $5 million in revenue from a $500,000 investment. The $4.5 million difference was pure profit, split between Stratton and the brokers. The clients, meanwhile, owned shares in a company with no real products, no revenue, and no realistic path to profitability. The stock price would briefly stay elevated as long as Stratton continued promoting it. But once Stratton stopped pushing the stock, prices would collapse, often falling back to pennies. Investors would lose 80–90% of their investment. Stream 2 was the IPO underwriting business. Small companies going public needed underwriters to sell shares to investors. Traditional underwriters like Goldman Sachs would only handle IPOs for legitimate companies with real businesses and growth potential. Stratton would underwrite IPOs for anyone willing to pay their fees, which were substantially higher than legitimate firms charged, typically 10 to 12% of capital raised versus the 5 to 7% that established firms charged. But the IPO business was where Stratton's operation became explicitly criminal. Jordan developed a system where Stratton would take companies public, use their army of brokers to create artificial demand that drove opening prices sky high, then allow company insiders and select Stratton clients to sell their shares at inflated prices. This is called a pump and dump scheme, and it's categorically illegal. The mechanics were sophisticated. Stratton would underwrite an IPO at, say, $5 per share. On opening day, Stratton brokers would create massive buy orders, driving the price to $15 to $20 per share within hours. Retail investors, seeing the stock price triple, would rush to buy, convinced they'd discovered the next Microsoft. Meanwhile, company insiders who'd received pre-IPO shares at $1 would sell at $18, making fortunes. Stratton would take commissions on both the initial IPO and the subsequent trading. Within days or weeks, once the artificial demand disappeared, stock prices would crash back to $5 or below. Retail investors would be left holding worthless shares, while insiders and Stratton walked away with millions. Stream 3 was even more problematic: stock loans and financing. Stratton started offering margin loans to clients, allowing them to borrow money to purchase more stock. The interest rates were predatory, 20–30% annually. But more importantly, these loans created financial ties that made it difficult for clients to liquidate losing positions. If a client owed Stratton $50,000 on a margin loan, they couldn't simply walk away from a losing stock position without repaying the debt. Jordan also developed relationships with offshore banks and money managers who would provide financing for his stock manipulation schemes. These banks, primarily based in Switzerland and the Caribbean, would provide capital that Stratton would use to purchase large positions in stocks they were manipulating, creating additional artificial demand. Look, the genius of Jordan's money machine was its self-reinforcing nature. The more money Stratton made, the more brokers wanted to work there. The more brokers Stratton had, the more stocks they could manipulate simultaneously. The more stocks they manipulated, the more money they made. It was a flywheel spinning faster and faster. By mid-1993, Stratton Oakmont had become a cultural phenomenon in the securities industry. They were famous, or infamous, for their aggressive tactics, extraordinary commission structures, and lavish lifestyle. Jordan encouraged this reputation. He wanted Stratton to be known as the place where hungry kids could become millionaires. The office culture had reached almost surreal levels of excess. Jordan instituted Party Fridays, where strippers would perform in the office. He hired rock bands to play during lunch breaks. He organized company trips to Vegas, Miami, and the Bahamas, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on entertainment for top producers. The message was clear: work hard, make money, live like a king. And hundreds of young brokers bought in completely. They'd work 70–80-hour weeks, making hundreds of cold calls daily, closing deals through sheer persistence and psychological manipulation. Then they'd party like rock stars, spending thousands on clubs, drugs, escorts, and status symbols. Jordan himself became increasingly extravagant. In 1993, he purchased a mansion in Old Brookville for $3.5 million, one of the most expensive residential properties sold in Long Island that year. The estate included 14 rooms, a tennis court, a pool, and a 6-car garage. He filled the garage with a collection that included a Mercedes, a Porsche, a Jaguar, and a custom Range Rover. He bought his first yacht, not the cigarette boat, but a proper yacht, a 167-foot Italian vessel that cost $7 million. He named it Nadine, after his second wife. The yacht had 6 staterooms, a crew of 9, and operational costs exceeding $500,000 annually just for maintenance and staff. You see, Jordan wasn't just wealthy, he was living like royalty. Private jets, vacations in Monaco, dinners where the wine bill exceeded $50,000. He'd drop $100,000 on a weekend in Vegas without thinking twice. At 31 years old, Jordan Belfort had accumulated wealth that would take most successful people a lifetime to build. But the money created problems beyond regulatory attention. Jordan's marriage to his first wife collapsed under the weight of his infidelity and lifestyle. He married Nadine Caridi, a former model he'd met at a party in 1991. Nadine represented a new chapter. She was beautiful, desired by other men, and Jordan displayed her like a trophy that proved his success. The marriage was troubled from the start. Jordan's drug use, which had been recreational, became increasingly serious. Cocaine, quaaludes, morphine. He'd show up to work obviously intoxicated, give rambling speeches to brokers, make erratic decisions. His employees learned to manage around his drug use, making important decisions when Jordan was sober and ignoring him when he wasn't. Here's the thing nobody talks about. Jordan's drug addiction didn't happen because of stress or trauma. It happened because he could afford it, and nobody would stop him. When you're generating $3 million monthly in personal income, you can afford a $50,000 monthly drug habit. And when everyone around you depends on you for their income, nobody tells you to slow down. By late 1993, Jordan's daily routine was almost absurd. He'd wake up at 6 a.m. and take quaaludes to take the edge off. He'd arrive at the office around 8 a.m., give morning meetings while visibly high, then spend hours on the phone with clients, moving millions of dollars in securities while impaired. Lunch would involve cocaine in his private office. Afternoons were for meetings with company CEOs, lawyers, or accountants, all while maintaining enough composure to appear functional. The money kept flowing despite Jordan's deteriorating condition because Stratton had become bigger than any individual. The system he'd built operated almost automatically. Brokers knew the pitches. Managers knew how to identify prospects. The machine required minimal oversight once it was running. But the excess was creating visibility that Jordan's lawyers increasingly warned about. When you buy a $7 million yacht, that's public record. When you purchase a $3.5 million estate, that attracts attention. When your brokers are making hundreds of thousands annually and partying conspicuously around Long Island, people notice. Local newspapers started running stories about the Wolf of Wall Street, a nickname that Jordan loved. He gave interviews portraying himself as a self-made millionaire who'd succeeded through determination and sales excellence. He never mentioned the fraud, the manipulation, or the thousands of investors who'd lost money on worthless stocks Stratton pushed. The truth is, by 1993, Stratton Oakmont had probably cost retail investors over $200 million in losses. Thousands of people had invested retirement savings, college funds, and life savings into stocks that Stratton promoted and that subsequently became worthless. Some victims lost everything. Some suffered financial ruin that destroyed marriages, forced home sales, and ended retirement plans. Jordan knew this intellectually, but had completely compartmentalized it emotionally. In his mind, investors were responsible for their own decisions. If they were greedy enough to chase high returns, sophisticated enough to open brokerage accounts, and dumb enough to believe his broker's pitches, then losses were their fault, not his. This psychological separation allowed Jordan to continue operating without guilt. He wasn't stealing from people. He was providing opportunities that they chose to accept. The fact that those opportunities were fundamentally fraudulent was irrelevant in his mental framework. By early 1994, Stratton's annual commission generation exceeded $150 million. Jordan's personal wealth approached $100 million. He was 31 years old and controlled one of the most profitable brokerage operations in America. He was also running a criminal enterprise that had defrauded thousands of investors and was under investigation by multiple federal agencies. The money machine was at its absolute peak, but machines that run this hot, this fast, with this much friction eventually break down. The only question was what would break first: regulatory pressure, internal collapse, or Jordan himself. What Jordan didn't know, what he was too intoxicated and arrogant to see, was that all three were already in motion. Federal investigators were building a case. His closest associates were beginning to worry about criminal liability. And Jordan's drug use was spiraling toward levels that would make functioning impossible. The absolute excess was about to reach its zenith, and the fall, when it came, would be spectacular. Chapter 6: Absolute Excess. The period from 1994 to 1996 represented Jordan Belfort's peak, the absolute pinnacle of wealth, power, and excess that would eventually become synonymous with Wall Street corruption. These were the years that the movie captured, the parties and drugs and lifestyle that seemed impossible, but were actually understated compared to reality. Jordan's net worth reached approximately $200 million by 1995. To understand the scale, that's equivalent to roughly $400 million in today's dollars. At age 32, Jordan Belfort was wealthier than established billionaires' children, corporate CEOs who'd worked decades, and most professional athletes at their career peaks. The money manifested in ways that sound fictional, but were meticulously documented in financial records that prosecutors would later use as evidence. Start with real estate. Jordan owned the 14-room Old Brookville estate as his primary residence. He purchased a beachfront property in the Hamptons for $4 million, cash. He bought an apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side for $2.5 million. He owned a condominium in Miami Beach, and he purchased property in the Bahamas on a private island where he planned to build a vacation compound. The primary estate was where the excess became almost comical. Jordan hired interior designers who charged $500,000 just for furnishings in the master bedroom. He installed a home theater that cost $300,000. The wine cellar contained bottles worth collectively over $1 million. He employed a full-time staff of 12 at the property: chefs, housekeepers, groundskeepers, security, personal assistants. Then there were the vehicles. Jordan owned approximately 15 cars at his peak, with a combined value exceeding $3 million. Multiple Mercedes, multiple Porsches, a Ferrari Testarossa, a Lamborghini, Jaguars, Range Rovers. He'd sometimes purchase vehicles on impulse. A broker would mention wanting a particular car, and Jordan would buy it as a bonus. You closed $200,000 this month? Here's a Porsche. But the yacht was where Jordan's excess reached almost mythological levels. The Nadine wasn't just expensive. It was a floating palace that announced wealth visible from miles away. The 167-foot yacht required a crew of 9 full-time employees. The captain alone made $150,000 annually. Operational costs, fuel, maintenance, insurance, crew salaries, docking fees exceeded $1 million yearly. Jordan would use the yacht for company parties, personal vacations, and simply because he could. He'd helicopter from Manhattan to Long Island, then take the yacht from Long Island to the Hamptons or Atlantic City just to avoid traffic. The helicopter itself cost $2 million, with operational costs of approximately $500,000 annually. Here's what people don't understand about that level of wealth. It becomes completely disconnected from normal economic reality. Jordan would spend $170,000 on a dinner for Stratton's top producers at a Manhattan restaurant. Not a typo. $170,000 for a single meal. Rare wines, premium champagne, the most expensive menu items, but also just because he could. The cost was almost irrelevant. Jordan was spending money faster than most people could count it. The drug use escalated proportionally with the wealth. What started as recreational cocaine and quaaludes evolved into systematic daily drug consumption that would have killed most people. Jordan's routine in 1995 involved taking quaaludes immediately upon waking, not for recreation, but because he'd developed such dependence that he needed them to feel normal. He'd arrive at the office obviously impaired. His speech would slur during morning meetings. He'd sometimes pass out at his desk for hours while deals worth millions happened around him. Stratton's senior management learned to simply work around Jordan's drug use, making decisions without him, and presenting them for approval when he was coherent. The quaalude use was particularly problematic because they'd been pulled from the market in the 1980s due to widespread abuse. Jordan had to source them illegally, primarily through connections with organized crime figures who smuggled them from overseas manufacturers. At his peak, Jordan was consuming 30-40 quaaludes daily, an amount that pharmacologists say should have been fatal. Cocaine was the other drug of choice. Jordan's daily cocaine consumption at peak exceeded $2,000 in value, roughly 10-15 grams daily. He'd use throughout the day to counteract the quaalude sedation, creating a cycle of uppers and downers that destroyed his natural brain chemistry. Look, the drug use wasn't just personal. It became embedded in Stratton's culture. Jordan encouraged his brokers to use cocaine, believing it enhanced their aggressive sales capabilities. Friday parties at the office featured open drug use. Strippers weren't just performing. They were often escorts who'd provide additional services to brokers in conference rooms during work hours. The company culture became increasingly surreal. Jordan hired a full-time bodyman whose sole job was to follow Jordan around and ensure he didn't hurt himself when severely intoxicated. He employed a team of lawyers on retainer, not for regulatory issues but for personal problems. DUIs, property damage, assault allegations from bar fights. Stratton's office itself evolved into something between a brokerage firm and a nightclub. Jordan installed a full bar in the office that was open during work hours. He brought in celebrity guests to boost morale, rappers, athletes, models. He'd sometimes close trading early and throw spontaneous parties with live music, open bars, and entertainment that became legendary in Long Island business circles. But here's what's interesting. Despite the chaos, Stratton continued generating extraordinary profits. The brokers, many of whom were also using drugs heavily, maintained their sales performance. The money machine kept running because the system Jordan built was so effective that it operated despite catastrophic management. By 1995, Stratton Oakmont had over 1,000 employees and was generating approximately $180 million annually in commissions. The firm's success attracted attention from legitimate Wall Street firms. Some established brokerages actually tried to recruit Stratton's top producers, offering similar commission structures in more stable environments. Jordan responded by increasing compensation for top brokers. He'd offer bonuses that exceeded annual salaries at traditional firms. The top 50 producers at Stratton were each making $500,000 to $1 million annually, extraordinary income for people often in their 20s with no college degrees. The wealth created loyalty. Brokers knew that Jordan's operation was legally questionable, that the stocks they pushed were often worthless, that they were participating in fraud. But the money was so extraordinary, so life-changing, that moral concerns evaporated. These weren't bad people necessarily. They were people who'd been given access to wealth that seemed impossible through legitimate means. Jordan understood this psychology perfectly. He'd give speeches about loyalty, about being part of something special, about defending Stratton against regulators who didn't understand what they were building. He framed regulatory attention not as consequences for fraud, but as persecution of success. You see, Jordan created a reality distortion field where his employees genuinely believed they were unfairly targeted. In their minds, they weren't committing fraud. They were aggressive salespeople in a competitive industry. The fact that their tactics violated securities laws was just regulatory overreach. This collective delusion allowed Stratton to continue operating even as regulatory pressure intensified. By 1995, the NASD was conducting active investigations. The SEC had opened multiple inquiries. Several states had launched their own securities fraud investigations, and the FBI had begun preliminary surveillance. Jordan's response was to spend more money on legal defense. He hired law firms that specialized in securities defense, paying retainers that exceeded $100,000 monthly. He instructed his lawyers to fight everything, every subpoena, every document request, every attempt at testimony. The strategy was to make prosecution so expensive and time-consuming that regulators would eventually move on to easier targets. For a while it seemed to work. Investigations dragged on for years without producing indictments. Stratton would be fined relatively small amounts, $50,000 here, $100,000 there, which Jordan paid without concern. These fines were essentially speeding tickets to someone generating millions monthly. But the investigations were slowly uncovering evidence that would eventually prove devastating. Federal agents were interviewing defrauded investors, collecting stories of life savings lost on worthless stocks that Stratton brokers had guaranteed would multiply in value. They were analyzing trading patterns that showed clear coordination between Stratton and company insiders. They were tracing money flows through offshore accounts that suggested systematic money laundering. What Jordan didn't fully appreciate, what his arrogance prevented him from seeing, was that federal investigators weren't deterred by legal obstacles. They were methodically building a case that would eventually be impossible to defend against. Meanwhile, Jordan's personal life was collapsing. His marriage to Nadine was troubled by constant infidelity, drug-fueled rages, and emotional abuse. They had 2 young children, Chandler and Carter, who were being raised in an environment of extraordinary wealth but complete instability. Nadine would later describe this period as terrifying. Jordan would disappear for days on drug binges. He'd bring groups of people back to their home at 3 a.m. for parties. He'd become violently angry when intoxicated. She lived in constant fear while simultaneously enjoying the lifestyle that Jordan's wealth provided. The contradiction was fundamental to Jordan's world. Everyone around him, his wife, his employees, his friends, benefited from his fraud while being damaged by his behavior. They were complicit and victims simultaneously. By early 1996, Jordan's drug use had reached levels that made functioning almost impossible. There are stories from this period that sound exaggerated, but are corroborated by multiple sources. Jordan driving his Lamborghini into a tree while Quaalude impaired and walking away laughing. Jordan passing out during client meetings and being carried out by bodyguards. Jordan taking a helicopter to Atlantic City for the weekend and disappearing for 5 days on a drug binge that required hospitalization. The excess had become pathological. Jordan wasn't enjoying the wealth anymore. He was trapped in a cycle of consumption that felt obligatory. He had to spend money, had to do drugs, had to party, because that's what the Wolf of Wall Street did. His identity had become so tied to excess that normalcy felt like failure. But the absolute excess was approaching its endpoint. Federal investigators were closing in. Jordan's closest associates were beginning to fear criminal prosecution. And the money machine, while still generating extraordinary profits, was showing signs of strain as regulatory pressure made operations increasingly difficult. The peak was about to turn into a fall, and when someone rises as high and as fast as Jordan Belfort, the fall tends to be catastrophic. Chapter 7. Dark Tactics. Behind the parties, yachts, and excess was a methodology of fraud so sophisticated that it took federal investigators years to fully understand and document. This chapter explores the actual tactics that Stratton Oakmont employed to defraud investors, techniques that went far beyond aggressive sales into calculated psychological warfare and securities manipulation. The tactics fall into several categories, each more problematic than the last. Tactic 1. The rat-holing system. This was Stratton's method for controlling stock prices after IPOs. When Stratton underwrote an initial public offering, they wouldn't simply sell shares to random investors. They'd carefully allocate shares to rat holes, accounts controlled by Stratton-friendly investors, who would follow instructions about when to buy and sell. Here's how it worked. Stratton would take a company public at $5 per share. They'd allocate most shares to rat holes at the IPO price. When trading began, Stratton brokers would create artificial buying pressure by convincing retail investors to purchase at higher prices, $8, $10, $12 per share. The rat holes would hold their shares, creating artificial scarcity that drove prices higher. Once the price reached Jordan's target, say $15 per share, he'd signal the rat holes to sell. The rat holes would dump their shares, generating huge profits. Simultaneously, company insiders would sell their shares at peak prices. Within days, the artificial demand would disappear, and stock prices would collapse back to $5 or below. Retail investors who bought at $12 to $15 per share, convinced they were getting in on the ground floor of a successful company, would watch their investments lose 70–80% of value within weeks. Meanwhile, the rat holes, insiders, and Stratton all made millions. This tactic is explicitly illegal under securities law. It's price manipulation and constitutes fraud. But proving it required demonstrating coordination between Stratton and the rat holes, which Jordan carefully obscured through intermediaries and offshore accounts. Tactic 2. The bailout system. When clients' investments inevitably lost value on the penny stocks and IPOs that Stratton pushed, angry investors would call demanding explanations. Some threatened lawsuits, some contacted regulators. This was dangerous for Stratton's continued operations. Jordan developed a tactic called the bailout to handle these situations. A senior broker would call the angry client and offer a solution. I understand you're frustrated. The stock didn't perform as we expected, but I have an opportunity to make you whole. I've got shares in another company that's about to break out. If you roll your remaining capital into this new position, I'm confident we can recover your losses. The client, desperate to recover losses and not wanting to accept failure, would often agree. They'd liquidate their losing position and invest remaining capital into another worthless stock. Stratton would generate new commissions, and the client would eventually lose the rest of their money. Look, the brilliance of the bailout system was that it prevented regulatory complaints. If Stratton could keep clients invested, even in losing positions, those clients wouldn't contact the NASD or SEC because they still had hope of recovery. Only after losing everything would they file complaints, by which time Stratton had already generated additional commissions. Tactic 3. The double cycle close. This was a psychological manipulation technique that Jordan developed specifically for wealthy investors who were initially skeptical. The tactic involved 2 calls separated by several weeks. In the first call, a Stratton broker would pitch a conservative stock, sometimes even a legitimate blue-chip security like IBM or AT&T. The broker would recommend a small investment, say $5,000, just to establish the relationship. The client, dealing with what seemed like a conservative recommendation from a registered broker-dealer, would often agree. Stratton would process that trade, generating minimal commission but establishing trust. The broker would call a few weeks later to report on the position's performance, which was usually modest gains since they'd recommended a legitimate stock. "John, your IBM position is up 7%. I wanted to update you before discussing a more aggressive opportunity." Then came the real pitch. Now that trust was established, the broker would introduce the penny stock or IPO that Stratton actually wanted to sell. "John, based on your success with IBM, I want to bring you into a ground floor opportunity. This is the kind of investment that could turn $50,000 into $500,000 over the next 18 months. The client, having just experienced a positive outcome with Stratton, was psychologically primed to trust the broker's judgment. The success of the first investment, even though it was deliberately conservative, created credibility that Stratton would exploit to sell worthless securities in the second cycle. Tactic 4. The offshore money laundering system. By 1995, Jordan had developed sophisticated methods for moving profits beyond US regulatory reach. He worked with Swiss banks, particularly a private bank in Geneva that specialized in high-net-worth clients seeking financial privacy. Jordan would move money through a complex series of transfers designed to obscure origin and ownership. Profits from Stratton would be wired to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. That company would then wire money to a British Virgin Islands entity. From there, funds would move to the Swiss account. Each transfer was documented as payment for consulting services, management fees, or licensing agreements, all fake, but creating a paper trail that appeared legitimate. The Swiss bank account was in the name of a trusted associate, not Jordan himself. This person would then follow Jordan's instructions about transferring money back to the US through additional layers of corporate structures. By the time funds arrived back in Jordan's control, they appeared to be legitimate business income or investment returns, not securities fraud profits. You see, money laundering isn't just about hiding cash. It's about creating documentary evidence that makes illicit income appear legitimate. Jordan understood this perfectly. He employed accountants who specialized in offshore structures and lawyers who knew exactly how much opacity was possible before triggering regulatory scrutiny. Tactic 5. The witness preparation system. As regulatory investigations intensified, Jordan knew that Stratton employees might be questioned by authorities. He developed a comprehensive witness preparation program that walked the line between legal advice and obstruction of justice. Jordan would hold meetings with brokers who might be interviewed by regulators. His lawyer would be present, making the conversation technically privileged attorney-client communication, but the content was essentially coaching on how to minimize admissions without committing perjury. The key phrases brokers were taught: "I don't recall. That was a long time ago. I'd have to check my records." Never explicitly lie, but also never volunteer information. Make investigators work for every detail. create enough uncertainty about dates, conversations, and decisions that building a clear timeline becomes difficult. Jordan also paid for lawyers for employees who faced regulatory questioning. This ensured loyalty. Employees knew that Jordan would protect them legally as long as they didn't cooperate with authorities. It also allowed Jordan's lawyers to monitor what employees told investigators, maintaining information control. Tactic 6. The strategic settlement approach. When regulatory agencies would fine Stratton or demand settlements, Jordan's lawyers would negotiate outcomes that minimized both financial impact and operational disruption. They'd agree to pay fines without admitting wrongdoing, which meant the settlements couldn't be used as evidence in future criminal prosecutions. Stratton paid millions in regulatory fines between 1992 and 1996, but these settlements were structured to appear like disagreements over technical compliance issues rather than admissions of fraud. The language was always carefully crafted. Stratton Oakmont agrees to pay $500,000 to settle allegations regarding supervisory procedures without admitting or denying the charges. This language protected Jordan legally while allowing Stratton to continue operations. Regulators could claim victory. They'd extracted fines and forced compliance improvements, but Stratton would simply adjust tactics slightly while continuing the same fundamental fraud. Here's the thing that made Jordan's tactics so effective. They were engineered with an understanding of how regulations and law enforcement actually work. Regulators are overwhelmed and understaffed. Prosecutors need overwhelming evidence to bring criminal charges. Civil settlements are easier than criminal prosecutions. Complex financial crimes are difficult to explain to juries. Jordan exploited every gap in the regulatory system. He operated in areas where proving intent was difficult. He created paper trails that appeared legitimate. He coached employees on how to minimize legal exposure. He hired legal talent that could outmaneuver prosecutors, and he generated enough profit to fund legal defenses that made prosecution prohibitively expensive. But there were limits to how long these tactics could work. By 1996, federal investigators had moved beyond routine securities regulation into criminal investigation. The FBI had opened a case file specifically on Jordan Belfort and Stratton Oakmont. They were using tools beyond administrative subpoenas, including wiretaps, informants, and financial analysis that could pierce the offshore structures Jordan had created. The dark tactics that had protected Jordan for years were about to become evidence in a criminal prosecution that would expose the full scope of his fraud. The question wasn't whether Jordan would face consequences, but how severe those consequences would be and whether he'd have any options to minimize them. The investigation was accelerating, and Jordan, still convinced of his own cleverness, still surrounded by employees who treated him like a god, still living in absolute excess, didn't fully appreciate how close the walls were closing. Chapter 8. FBI Pressure. The FBI's investigation into Jordan Belfort and Stratton Oakmont officially began in early 1996, though preliminary surveillance had started months earlier. The case was assigned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Securities Fraud Unit in the New York field office, a specialized team that handled white-collar crime involving Wall Street firms. The lead agent was Gregory Coleman, an FBI veteran who'd spent over a decade investigating financial crimes. Coleman was methodical, patient, and personally offended by the brazenness of Stratton's fraud. He'd reviewed complaint files showing elderly investors losing retirement savings, middle-class families losing college funds, all while Jordan Belfort bought yachts and threw parties visible from helicopters. Coleman's investigation began with the basics, gathering documentary evidence that could establish a pattern of fraud. The FBI subpoenaed trading records from Stratton Oakmont, showing every transaction executed over multiple years. They analyzed these records for patterns that indicated manipulation, artificially inflated prices, coordinated trading between related accounts, and systematic profiting by insiders while retail investors lost money. What Coleman discovered was extraordinary. The trading patterns were so obvious, so blatant, that it seemed impossible Stratton had operated openly for so long. He could identify dozens of stocks where Stratton's brokers created artificial demand that drove prices up 300–500%, followed by massive sell-offs by insiders, followed by price collapses that destroyed retail investor value. But trading patterns alone weren't sufficient for criminal prosecution. Coleman needed to prove intent, that Jordan Belfort knowingly orchestrated fraud rather than simply being an aggressive broker whose recommendations didn't work out. Securities law distinguishes between bad advice and deliberate fraud. The difference is intent. Coleman began interviewing defrauded investors, collecting stories that demonstrated a pattern of misrepresentation. One investor described being told that a stock was guaranteed to triple in 90 days. Another reported that a Stratton broker claimed the company was about to announce a major pharmaceutical breakthrough. A third investor said he was told that institutional investors are buying millions of shares. You need to get in before the price jumps. Each statement was carefully documented. Coleman would then compare these investor accounts to actual company realities. The pharmaceutical company had no drugs in development. The institutional investors didn't exist. The guaranteed returns were pure fabrication. Jordan's brokers weren't just optimistic. They were systematically lying about material facts. Here's where the investigation got complicated. Proving that Jordan personally directed these lies required evidence of his knowledge and instructions. Stratton brokers could claim they were making independent sales pitches that Jordan didn't personally approve. Jordan's lawyers would argue that any false statements were rogue employees acting against company policy, not corporate-directed fraud. Coleman needed to get inside Stratton's operations. He needed informants who could testify about Jordan's personal involvement, about morning meetings where specific lies were instructed, about the compensation systems that rewarded fraud. That meant flipping someone on the inside. The FBI began identifying potential cooperators, Stratton employees who might face criminal liability themselves and would cooperate in exchange for reduced sentences. Coleman created a list of targets: senior brokers who'd made millions, managers who directly implemented Jordan's tactics, and especially Danny Porrish, Jordan's number two. In mid-1996, the FBI approached several former Stratton brokers who'd left the firm. These conversations were exploratory, agents offering immunity in exchange for testimony. Most refused initially. They'd made fortunes at Stratton, felt loyalty to Jordan, and feared retaliation if they cooperated. But Coleman was patient. He'd explain the reality. Federal investigators had sufficient evidence to charge multiple individuals with securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Sentences could reach 10-20 years. Alternatively, cooperation would mean immunity from prosecution, protection from retaliation, and the chance to testify against the people actually responsible. Look, the FBI's strategy was to work up the chain, charge lower-level brokers who directly lied to clients, offer them deals if they'd testify against their managers, use manager testimony to target Danny Porrish and other senior executives. Eventually, build a case against Jordan himself that was so overwhelming he'd have no choice but to plead guilty. By late 1996, the FBI had secured cooperation from 3 former Stratton brokers. These individuals provided detailed testimony about morning meetings where Jordan would specifically instruct brokers on what to tell clients. They described the rat-holing system and identified specific accounts used to manipulate prices. They explained the bailout system and how it was used to prevent regulatory complaints. Armed with this testimony, Coleman obtained authorization for more aggressive investigative tools. In January 1997, a federal judge approved wiretaps on Stratton's phone lines. For 3 months, FBI agents listened to and recorded hundreds of calls between Stratton brokers and clients. The wiretapped conversations were damning. Brokers making explicit guarantees about stock performance that were categorically false. Managers coaching brokers on how to pressure resistant clients. And occasionally, Jordan himself calling clients to close major deals using tactics that violated multiple securities laws. One recorded call became central to the eventual prosecution. Jordan called a wealthy investor to sell shares in an IPO Stratton was underwriting. During the pitch, Jordan stated, "We have institutional commitments for 80% of the offering. This is going to open at $8 and trade to $15 within the first week. I'm only offering this to my best clients." The FBI verified that there were 0 institutional commitments. The stock opened at $8 due to Stratton's manipulation, briefly traded to $12, then collapsed to $4 within 2 weeks. The client lost over $200,000. And the FBI had Jordan's voice on tape, making materially false statements to close the sale. You see, wiretaps are extraordinarily powerful evidence because they eliminate the he said, she said nature of most fraud cases. It's one thing for an investor to claim a broker lied. It's another thing entirely to have tape recordings of those lies being told in real time. By spring 1997, Coleman had built a prosecutable case. The FBI had trading records showing systematic manipulation, cooperating witnesses describing Jordan's personal direction of fraudulent tactics, and wiretapped calls capturing crimes in progress. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York began preparing indictments. But before moving forward, prosecutors wanted to flip Danny Porush. Danny was Jordan's closest associate, involved in every major decision and present at meetings where fraud was planned. His testimony would make conviction almost certain. In June 1997, FBI agents arrested Danny Porush at his home in a coordinated morning raid that also involved searches of Stratton's offices. The arrests were designed to maximize pressure, agents executing search warrants, seizing computers and documents, and making clear that criminal charges were imminent. Danny was transported to FBI headquarters for questioning. Coleman laid out the evidence, recorded calls, witness testimony, trading records. Danny was facing 15 to 20 years in federal prison on multiple felony counts. But Coleman offered an alternative, cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Danny, facing the reality of lengthy incarceration, asked for time to consult with his lawyer. The FBI released him on bail, but made clear that a cooperation decision needed to happen soon. The window for favorable deals would close once indictments were filed. Here's what's interesting. Danny's arrest sent shockwaves through Stratton. Brokers who'd felt invincible suddenly realized that criminal prosecution was real. Some immediately hired lawyers. Others began destroying documents, deleting files, and eliminating evidence, actions that themselves constituted obstruction of justice and would later result in additional charges. Jordan, meanwhile, maintained public confidence. He held a meeting at Stratton, announcing that the arrests were regulatory overreach, that Danny had done nothing wrong, and that Stratton would fight the charges aggressively. He increased pay for top brokers to maintain loyalty. He instructed employees not to speak with federal agents without lawyers present. But privately, Jordan was panicking. He understood that Danny knew everything, every fraud, every manipulation, every offshore account. If Danny cooperated, Jordan's legal position would become almost impossible to defend. His lawyers began preparing for the possibility of an indictment and discussing potential plea agreements. The FBI pressure was working. By creating criminal liability for multiple individuals and offering cooperation deals, they were fracturing the loyalty that had held Stratton together. Employees began calculating their personal risk versus their loyalty to Jordan, and increasingly self-preservation was winning. In August 1997, after weeks of negotiation, Danny Porush agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would plead guilty to securities fraud and money laundering, serve a minimum prison term, and provide testimony against Jordan Belfort and other Stratton executives. Danny's cooperation was the turning point. He provided prosecutors with detailed information about Jordan's offshore accounts, the mechanics of specific stock manipulations, and the internal systems used to defraud investors. He identified rat holes by name and explained how they coordinated with Stratton. And he was willing to testify under oath about Jordan's personal involvement in every aspect of the fraud. With Danny's cooperation secured, prosecutors began preparing indictments against Jordan Belfort. The charges would include securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. If convicted on all counts, Jordan faced maximum sentences exceeding 20 years in federal prison. The FBI pressure had worked. Jordan Belfort, who'd spent a decade building an empire of fraud while believing himself untouchable, was about to face the reality that the federal government had both the evidence and the determination to hold him accountable. The Wolf of Wall Street was about to be brought down, and the method would be the same one that had destroyed countless criminal enterprises before: turning confederates into witnesses, building overwhelming evidence, and making the cost of fighting greater than the cost of surrendering. Chapter 9. Betrayal Network. The transformation of Jordan Belfort's closest allies into government witnesses represents one of the most devastating aspects of his downfall. This wasn't just about legal pressure, it was about the complete collapse of the loyalty structure that Jordan had built over a decade. Danny Porish's cooperation was just the beginning. Once federal prosecutors demonstrated that senior Stratton executives were willing to testify against Jordan, the floodgates opened. Others began calculating their options and recognizing that loyalty to Jordan meant potentially decades in prison. The first major cooperator after Danny was a man we'll call Brian. Several cooperating witnesses requested anonymity. Brian had been one of Stratton's original brokers, hired in 1989 when the firm had fewer than 20 employees. He'd made millions over the years and considered Jordan a friend. They'd vacationed together, attended each other's family events, and shared confidences about personal and business matters. But when FBI agents showed Brian evidence of his own criminal liability, recorded calls where he'd made false statements to clients, documentation of his involvement in stock manipulation, Brian's loyalty evaporated. His lawyer explained the reality. He was facing 10-15 years in federal prison. His wealth would be seized through asset forfeiture. His family would be destroyed, or he could cooperate, serve a reduced sentence, and rebuild his life afterward. Brian chose cooperation. In September 1997, he began providing testimony to federal prosecutors. His value was in explaining the daily mechanics of Stratton's operations, how morning meetings worked, how brokers were trained to lie, how the company culture celebrated fraud as aggressive salesmanship. What's interesting is that Brian genuinely seemed to believe until his arrest that Stratton's activities were legal. He'd been so indoctrinated into Jordan's worldview that they were just aggressive brokers in a competitive industry that the criminal nature of his actions hadn't fully registered. The FBI interviews forced him to confront that he'd been participating in systematic fraud that destroyed people's lives. Another critical cooperator was Stratton's chief financial officer. This individual had direct knowledge of the offshore accounts, the money laundering systems, and the financial structures Jordan used to hide profits. He could testify about specific conversations where Jordan discussed moving money beyond regulatory reach, about falsified financial statements provided to regulators, and about the accounting manipulations that made Stratton appear more legitimate than it was. The CFO's cooperation was devastating because it provided the paper trail that connected all the pieces. He had access to banking records, corporate documents, and financial statements that proved the offshore money movement wasn't legitimate business activity, but deliberate concealment of fraud proceeds. Look, the network of betrayal extended beyond Stratton employees. The rat holes, investors who'd helped Stratton manipulate stock prices, also began cooperating when faced with their own criminal liability. These individuals could testify about specific instructions they'd received from Jordan or Danny about when to buy and sell, proving coordination that turned price movements from unfortunate market dynamics into deliberate fraud. One rat hole testified about a meeting in Jordan's office where Jordan explicitly explained the manipulation strategy. "We're taking this company public at $6. I need you to hold your shares until I tell you. We're going to drive the price to $15, then I'll call you. You sell everything at once, make your profit, and move on to the next one." This testimony was crucial because it demonstrated Jordan's personal involvement in coordinating the scheme. He wasn't just a CEO whose employees acted without his knowledge. He was the architect personally directing the fraud. By late 1997, federal prosecutors had secured cooperation from over a dozen individuals formerly part of Jordan's inner circle. These weren't low-level employees with tangential involvement. These were people who'd attended Jordan's parties, vacationed on his yacht, and considered themselves part of his family. The psychological impact on Jordan was profound. He'd built Stratton on loyalty, on the idea that they were all in it together, that success came from unity against the outside world. Discovering that his closest allies were testifying against him shattered Jordan's worldview. His paranoia intensified. He suspected everyone of wearing wires, He stopped having substantive conversations with anyone except his lawyers. He began communicating through intermediaries, afraid that any direct conversation might be recorded and used as evidence. Here's the thing about cooperation in federal cases. Once it starts, it becomes a cascade. Each new cooperator makes others feel more justified in cooperating. Everyone else is testifying, "Why should I go to prison alone to protect Jordan?" The loyalty that seemed unbreakable when everyone was making money evaporated when facing real prison time. Some cooperators expressed genuine remorse during their FBI interviews. They talked about investors they'd defrauded, about guilt they'd suppressed while living large on illegal profits. One former broker broke down crying while describing a 70-year-old widow he'd convinced to invest her $150,000 in retirement savings into a worthless stock that he'd known would collapse. But other cooperators showed no remorse. They simply wanted to minimize their own consequences. They'd testify against Jordan not because they'd experienced moral awakening, but because it was the strategically optimal choice for self-preservation. Jordan's lawyers warned him that the cooperation agreements were creating an impossible defense position. With multiple witnesses willing to testify about his personal involvement in fraud, about specific conversations and instructions, about the systems he'd created, conviction at trial was almost certain. The government's case became overwhelming. They had recorded calls of Jordan making false statements to close sales trading records, showing systematic manipulation across dozens of stocks. Testimony from senior executives about Jordan's personal direction of fraud banking records proving money laundering through offshore accounts. Testimony from rat holes about coordinated stock manipulation, evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. Faced with this evidence, Jordan's lawyers began discussing plea negotiations. The goal was to secure an agreement that would minimize prison time and allow Jordan to retain some assets to support his family after release. But prosecutors had significant leverage. They could charge Jordan with hundreds of separate counts of fraud, each carrying substantial prison time. They could pursue asset forfeiture that would seize essentially everything Jordan owned. And they could charge Nadine, Jordan's wife, as a co-conspirator in money laundering schemes that involved overseas accounts in her name. You see, the threat to charge Nadine was particularly effective leverage. Jordan, for all his moral failings regarding fraud, loved his children and didn't want their mother facing prison time. Prosecutors understood this and made clear that Nadine's legal exposure could be eliminated if Jordan cooperated fully. In early 1998, Jordan's legal team received the formal indictment. The charges were extensive: securities fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice. Maximum combined sentences exceeded 20 years in federal prison. Jordan had two choices: go to trial, where conviction was almost certain given the evidence and cooperating witnesses, or negotiate a plea agreement that would involve cooperation but result in reduced sentences. Going to trial meant potential decades in prison and complete financial ruin through asset forfeiture. Fighting the charges would cost millions in legal fees with minimal chance of acquittal, and he'd be separated from his young children during their most formative years. Negotiating a plea meant admitting guilt, cooperating with authorities by testifying against others, serving reduced prison time, and potentially retaining some assets. It meant becoming the same kind of cooperating witness he'd been betrayed by. The decision was agonizing. Jordan's ego made admitting guilt almost unbearable. His entire identity was built on being the Wolf of Wall Street, the guy who conquered the system, who made his own rules. Pleading guilty meant acknowledging that he was just another criminal who'd been caught. But practical reality won. In March 1998, Jordan Belfort's legal team notified prosecutors that he was willing to discuss a cooperation agreement. The negotiations would take months, but the outcome was inevitable. Jordan would plead guilty, cooperate with ongoing investigations, and face sentencing that would end his life as he knew it. The betrayal network had completed its work. Jordan, who'd built an empire by commanding loyalty, discovered that loyalty purchased with money evaporates when the money stops flowing and prison time looms. His closest allies, his trusted executives, even his friends, all chose self-preservation over solidarity. The Wolf of Wall Street, who'd orchestrated one of the largest securities frauds in American history, who'd made $200 million before age 35, who'd lived like royalty, was about to enter the criminal justice system not as a defiant defendant, but as a cooperating witness against his own organization. The fall was complete. All that remained was determining how far he'd fall and what would be left when he hit bottom. Chapter 10. Complete Collapse. The formal collapse of Jordan Belfort's empire occurred over an 18-month period, from late 1997 to mid-1999. It wasn't a single dramatic event, but rather a cascading series of failures that destroyed everything he'd built and reduced him from $200 million net worth to essentially nothing. The first domino was Stratton Oakmont itself. In December 1997, the National Association of Securities Dealers expelled Stratton from membership, effectively ending their ability to operate as a registered broker-dealer. The expulsion came after years of investigations that had finally accumulated sufficient evidence of systematic fraud. Without NASD membership, Stratton couldn't legally execute securities trades. The firm was effectively shut down overnight. Over 1,000 employees lost their jobs immediately. The offices were locked, computers seized, and operations terminated. For the brokers who'd made fortunes at Stratton, the shutdown was catastrophic. Many had been living paycheck to paycheck despite enormous incomes, spending everything on cars, homes, drugs, and lifestyle. When the paychecks stopped, they discovered that their expensive possessions came with expensive maintenance costs they could no longer afford. Dozens of former Stratton brokers faced personal bankruptcy within months of the firm's closure. The Porsches got repossessed. The houses went into foreclosure. The lifestyles that had seemed permanent evaporated almost instantly. Jordan himself faced immediate financial pressure. His income, which had been running $3 million monthly at peak, stopped completely. But his expenses continued. The estate cost $100,000 monthly in maintenance and staff. The yacht cost $1 million annually in operational expenses. The car collection required insurance and maintenance. He was spending over $200,000 monthly just maintaining his lifestyle. Jordan had substantial assets. The real estate alone was worth over $10 million. But liquidating those assets took time, and they were increasingly subject to legal claims. The SEC filed civil forfeiture actions seeking to seize assets as proceeds of fraud. Defrauded investors filed lawsuits attempting to recover losses. Creditors who'd loaned money to Jordan or Stratton began demanding payment. The offshore accounts, which Jordan had believed were safe, became problematic. Swiss banks, facing pressure from US authorities and their own anti-money laundering compliance obligations, began freezing accounts associated with American fraud investigations. Money that Jordan had carefully moved beyond regulatory reach became inaccessible. By mid-1998, Jordan's financial situation had deteriorated dramatically. He'd been forced to sell the yacht for $3.5 million, less than half what he'd paid for it. The Hamptons property sold at auction for $2.8 million. The car collection was liquidated, generating about $1.5 million. Most of the proceeds went directly to lawyers or were seized through forfeiture actions. Look, the asset forfeiture process is designed to be punishing. The government would identify an asset, a property, a bank account, an investment, and file a civil claim asserting it was purchased with fraud proceeds. Jordan would then have to prove the asset was acquired with legitimate income, which was essentially impossible, given that all his wealth came from Stratton. Even assets in Nadine's name became targets. Prosecutors argued that money was moved into her name specifically to avoid forfeiture, making those transfers fraudulent conveyances that could be reversed. The legal battles over assets consumed millions in legal fees, while generating relatively little retained wealth for Jordan. His personal life collapsed in parallel with his finances. Nadine filed for divorce in 1998, citing Jordan's infidelity, drug abuse, and the impossibility of continuing a marriage with someone facing criminal prosecution. The divorce was contentious. Nadine sought primary custody of their 2 children and substantial financial support. Jordan fought the custody arrangement desperately. His children were the one part of his life that still felt meaningful, but his legal position was weak. He was an admitted drug addict facing federal prison. The court granted Nadine primary custody, with Jordan receiving limited supervised visitation. The drug use, ironically, intensified during this period of crisis. Jordan was consuming quaaludes and cocaine in quantities that should have been fatal. He later described this period as attempted suicide through substance abuse, not actively trying to die, but also not particularly trying to stay alive. There are stories from this time that sound impossible, but are documented in court records. Jordan crashed his Mercedes while intoxicated, totaling the vehicle and breaking his leg. He was hospitalized for a week. Upon release, he immediately began using drugs again and was re-hospitalized within days for overdose. His parents, Max and Leah Belfort, who'd watched their son rise to extraordinary wealth, now watched him destroy himself. They attempted interventions, hired addiction specialists, and begged Jordan to enter treatment. He'd agree, spend a few days in rehab, then check himself out and resume using. You see, Jordan had lost everything that defined his identity. He wasn't the Wolf of Wall Street anymore. He wasn't wealthy, he wasn't powerful, he wasn't surrounded by people who respected him. He was a drug addict awaiting prison, abandoned by former friends, divorced, separated from his children, and facing a future that looked nothing like the life he'd built. The plea agreement negotiations continued throughout 1998. Jordan's cooperation was valuable to prosecutors, beyond just his own case. He could provide testimony about other brokers, about the companies whose stocks he'd manipulated, and about the broader penny stock industry's fraudulent practices. Prosecutors wanted Jordan to testify in multiple cases. Each testimony might result in additional sentence reductions, but cooperation meant publicly admitting his crimes, testifying against former friends and colleagues, and becoming known as a snitch, a label that carried serious consequences in both criminal and business worlds. In September 1998, Jordan Belfort formally pleaded guilty to securities fraud and money laundering. The plea agreement required full cooperation with ongoing investigations, payment of restitution to defrauded investors, and asset forfeiture of essentially everything he owned. The restitution amount was calculated at $110.4 million, the estimated total losses suffered by investors on stocks that Stratton had fraudulently promoted. This amount was largely symbolic. Jordan clearly didn't have $110 million remaining. But it established a judgment that would follow him for life, requiring payment of any future income toward the restitution obligation. The asset forfeiture was immediate and comprehensive. The government seized the old Brookville estate, valued at $3.5 million. The Manhattan apartment, $2.5 million. The Miami Beach condo, $1.2 million. The remaining vehicles, $800,000 bank accounts containing approximately $2 million investment accounts, $1.5 million jewelry and personal items, $500,000. The total forfeiture exceeded $12 million. Combined with previous asset sales, Jordan had liquidated or lost approximately $25 million in assets. Where did the other $175 million go? Some was spent over the years on lifestyle expenses, drugs, and partying. Some was seized through earlier forfeiture actions, and some remained hidden in offshore accounts that Jordan denied controlling, claims that prosecutors suspected were lies, but couldn't definitively prove. By early 1999, Jordan was essentially broke. He was living in a modest apartment, driving a Honda Civic, the only vehicle he was allowed to retain, and depending on financial support from his parents. At age 36, he'd gone from $200 million net worth to negative net worth in less than 2 years. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for March 2003, delayed multiple times to allow Jordan to complete his cooperation obligations. The delay was strategic for prosecutors. They wanted Jordan to testify in other cases before his own sentencing, ensuring he couldn't receive his sentence and then refuse to cooperate further. Jordan testified in 6 separate federal cases between 1999 and 2002. He described the mechanics of securities fraud, identified co-conspirators, and explained complex financial schemes to juries. His testimony resulted in convictions in every case, helping prosecutors secure sentences for dozens of individuals involved in the broader penny stock fraud schemes. But testifying came with personal costs. Jordan became known as a cooperating witness, a label that carried implications of cowardice and betrayal. Former associates who were convicted partially based on his testimony threatened retaliation. Jordan required protective measures, including restrictions on his location being made public. The complete collapse affected more than just Jordan. His parents lost their retirement savings, which they'd invested with Jordan's guidance. His brother had worked at Stratton and faced his own legal consequences. Nadine struggled to raise 2 young children while dealing with the public scandal. And the investors, the thousands of people who'd lost money on Stratton's fraudulent schemes, received almost nothing. The restitution agreement required Jordan to pay 50% of his gross income until the $110 million judgment was satisfied. But with no income and no assets, restitution payments were essentially zero. The complete collapse of Jordan Belfort's empire was comprehensive. He lost his wealth, his family, his freedom. Prison was still coming, his reputation, and his identity. The Wolf of Wall Street became just another white-collar criminal facing the consequences of his choices. What remained was prison time, and the question of what, if anything, Jordan could build from the ruins of his former life. Chapter 11. Prison Years. In July 2003, Jordan Belfort reported to Taft Correctional Institution in California to begin serving his sentence for securities fraud and money laundering. The final sentence was 46 months in federal prison, significantly reduced from the maximum 20+ years he could have received due to his cooperation with authorities. 46 months meant approximately 4 years of incarceration, though federal prisoners with good behavior typically serve about 85% of their sentence. Jordan would likely spend roughly 3 years behind bars before release to a halfway house and eventual supervised release. Taft Correctional Institution was a low-security federal prison, sometimes called a club-fed facility because of its relatively relaxed conditions compared to medium or maximum security prisons. Low-security federal facilities house non-violent offenders considered minimal security risks. There are no cells, just dormitory-style housing, no armed guards inside the perimeter, more freedom of movement and access to programs. But even minimum security federal prison is still prison. Jordan lost his freedom, his privacy, and his autonomy. He shared a dormitory room with dozens of other inmates. He ate institutional food. He followed strict schedules. He wore prison-issued clothing. He was searched randomly. He was told when to wake up, when to eat, when to work, and when to sleep. Prison also forced sobriety. Jordan had no access to quaaludes or cocaine. The withdrawal was physically and psychologically agonizing. He experienced severe depression, anxiety, and cravings. The prison medical unit provided minimal support, essentially just monitoring to ensure he didn't die, not comprehensive addiction treatment. Jordan spent his prison time working in the facility library, a relatively cushy job assignment that allowed him to read extensively. He read business books, memoirs, and psychology texts. He began thinking about how to explain his life story, how to make sense of the rise and fall he'd experienced. Other prisoners found Jordan's personality magnetic, even in incarceration. He'd hold court in the dormitory, telling stories about Stratton, about the money, about the lifestyle. He became a quasi-celebrity among white-collar offenders who viewed him as the ultimate example of how far you could push the system before consequences arrived. Jordan also maintained contact with his children through letters and occasional phone calls. Federal prison allows limited phone access, typically 15 minutes per call, with all conversations monitored. Jordan would call his kids weekly, trying to maintain some parental connection despite the circumstances. The halfway house experience was vastly different from prison. He had his own room, could leave during the day for approved activities, work, family visits, medical appointments, and had significantly more freedom. But he still had curfews, mandatory check-ins, and random drug testing. Jordan used the halfway house period to begin rebuilding his life. He couldn't work in securities. He was permanently barred from the industry. He needed to find new sources of income while facing the restitution obligation that required paying 50% of his gross income toward the $110 million judgment. He started doing motivational speaking, initially for free at local business groups and sales training seminars. The pitch was simple. He'd built one of the most successful sales operations in history using techniques that were now available to legitimate businesses. He could teach ethical sales strategies based on the same psychological principles that had made Stratton so effective. But the book's commercial success created a new income stream. Jordan earned approximately $500,000 from the initial book deal and subsequent royalties. Under his restitution agreement, he was required to pay 50% to victims. He paid roughly $21,000 initially, then stopped making payments entirely, claiming he couldn't afford them while paying for rent, food, and expenses. His speaking business continued growing. Jordan positioned himself as an expert in sales training and business motivation. He offered online courses teaching ethical persuasion techniques. The irony of a convicted fraudster teaching ethics was not lost on critics, but Jordan maintained that his techniques were legitimate when applied to honest businesses. Here's the thing about redemption. It requires more than simply stopping the bad behavior. It requires accountability, restitution, and genuine change. Jordan achieved sobriety, which was significant. He stopped committing fraud, which was legally necessary. But he never fully faced the human cost of his crimes or made serious efforts to repair the damage. In interviews, when Jordan discusses Stratton Oakmont, there's often a nostalgic quality to his descriptions. He talks about the energy and the excitement and the family we built. These are not the words of someone who views that period as shameful, but rather someone who views it as the peak of his life that circumstances forced him to abandon. Jordan Belfort's redemption arc is ultimately a story about America's complicated relationship with white-collar crime. We're simultaneously horrified by financial fraud and fascinated by the criminals who perpetrate it. We want accountability, but also love a comeback story. We condemn the crime while celebrating the criminal's audacity.